save lives. We can no longer act like we are powerless to stop mass murders in our communities when it is clear there is so much we can do. Pass this bill. Enough is enough.
Gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. Green.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. In 1990, our schools became gun-free school zones. And on September 6, 1990, when I was 16 years old, my high school went on lockdown because one of the students at my school brought 3 guns to school in a duffel bag on the school bus, brought the guns into our school, and proceeded to take control of our high school. And he was the only person in the school that had guns. That's why that happened. There was no one to protect us that had a gun that day. The only person with guns was the very mentally ill, upset teenager who had brought guns to school that day to kill other students. I know that fear. As a matter of fact, I think I'm the only member of Congress that that's actually happened to. And I'm also a mom. I've dropped off my kids at school for years wondering, would this happen at my children's school? Would they face a terrible fate like the poor children in Uvalde? This should never happen to our children. And I can't help but to point out to all of us here, while we're debating how to protect our kids in school and what we're debating about our Second Amendment gun rights, I want to point out that we're all so privileged to be in this building being protected by armed guards with guns who are protecting our lives. And I find it shocking to me that this body of Congress won't do the same thing for children all over America in schools, because we know one thing works. We know that a gun is a tool, and it's a weapon that can be used to defend yourself or defend others, and we're all lucky enough to have that privilege. But our school children aren't. If we really want to be serious about protecting our kids here in America, we'll repeal the Gun-Free School Zones Act, and we will put into action real legislation that protects children everywhere, all over America in school, with good guys with guns, the same way we're being protected. I yield back.
Gentleman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1.5 minutes to the distinguished member of the Judiciary Committee, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Deutsch.
Gentleman's recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm disappointed in the way that our colleagues are so cavalierly avoiding the facts. These common sense measures, when we passed them, had we passed them before, could have saved over 400 people killed in mass shootings since Columbine. I'm disappointed in the cavalier mischaracterization of jurisprudence. Justice Scalia said that the right secured by the Second Amendment is not unlimited. My colleagues know that the changes in this law that we're proposing today will not undermine the Second Amendment in any way. But, Madam Speaker, I have 2 documents that inform everything I do here. One is the Constitution of the United States, and the other is this list that I wrote on February 14th, 2018, of every one of the 17 members of my community slaughtered by a killer with an AR-15 in his high school. We've heard a lot about foundational rights, foundational liberties, as if the Second Amendment is it's the sum total of the Constitution. Madam Speaker, the First Amendment matters as well. And for these 17, they have no right to practice religion and to pray for themselves or all of those who are killed every time we offer thoughts and prayers. And for these 17 and everyone killed by gun violence, they cannot peaceably assemble, as the First Amendment gives the right to all of Americans. And Madam Speaker, most of all, they cannot petition the government for redress of their grievances. Not these 17, not the 19 from Uvalde, no one killed in this gun violence. Today, we can help redress the grievances of all those lost to gun violence by passing this important legislation.
Gentleman's time's expired.
We must, we will, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Sheriff Rutherford.
Gentleman's recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Chair, I rise today in opposition to H.R. 7910 because this bill does nothing to stop human violence, which is the real problem at hand here. Straw purchases are already illegal. You can't buy a gun for someone else to get around the background check. Bump stocks are already illegal, regulated like automatic weapons, thanks to the Trump administration. And infringing on the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding Americans is not the answer. In fact, the bill before us will even make criminals out of legal gun owners. This bill would put the federal government in charge of law-abiding citizens and how they store their firearms inside their own homes. This bill puts firearms storage over and above self-defense. Instead, let's work together to address human violence problems by bolstering our mental health system, identifying individuals before they become active shooters and mass murderers, and improving our schools through crime prevention through environmental design, CPTED. It can be done. With that, Madam Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I've heard over and over again we ought to harden our schools. We ought to have every teacher have a gun. One question needs to be asked as that argument goes forward. Why? Why do we need to do that? We need to do that because an 18-year-old was able to buy 2 AR-15s, go to the school in Uvalde, and shoot up all of the students and teachers, 19. That's presumably why we have to harden our schools. Maybe it's time for us to come to the reality that it's time for us to pass common sense gun safety legislation. This particular piece of legislation does just that. Doesn't take away the Second Amendment rights, but what it does is to provide every American with the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and not to have to whether their school has been hardened sufficiently to prevent an 18-year-old with 2 military-style weapons to enter that school. It's time for us to act, pass this legislation.
Gentleman from Ohio.
Madam Speaker, we reserve.
Gentleman from New York.